This is one of the oldest tanks in the game right now, and it is the Tier 9 heavy tank, the ST1, and it blew my socks off every single time I play it. And it's of course the Tier 9 heavy tank from the Soviet line. This is one that leads to the IS-4, and both tanks are really underrated in my opinion, and we're going to see exactly why the ST1 is a tank that you're going to be wanting to at least play at some point when you do play World of Tanks console, and hopefully this is going to give you a good indication as to how you can play the tank, as well as, you know, the sorts of things you should be keeping an eye out for when you are coming up against this tank. Now, this tank is primarily an aggressive heavy tank that relies upon using the turret armor that it does have, and of course it's a big chunky turret, and it almost looks somewhat similar to the Turan. Now of course this turret is much stronger than the Turan, you don't get auto penned by everything basically, and it features this kind of very rounded but also flat turret, and that is because it has these rounded edges, but it has really thick armor, so you're able to bounce pretty much every single tank that you'll come up against, even some of the top tier tank destroyers, so things like the tier 10s, and the only real places where you do get penned in this vehicle is in those cupolas, which are two weak points. They are very small, as with all of the Soviet cupolas. They're not really a true weak point, to be honest with you, and that really allows you to play hold down with this vehicle. And even if you aren't playing hold down and you're using the frontal armor of this vehicle, then you can bounce quite a few rounds if you're using it correctly, trying to both side scrape or at least give the enemy tanks just a small slither of the side armor of this vehicle, and that really comes out with some brilliant games. And this is one of the first games, because I've got two here today for you guys, and this one is a game that I really did enjoy playing, because it kind of showcases that even in a bottom tier match, when you're playing up against these tier 10s, granted there are some tier 8s in the game as well that you can farm up here with this thing, it can still hold out against these tier 10s. And on this flank in particular, we've got a Badger, which is the tier 10 British tank destroyer that has that good armor in quotation marks, but you know, good armor is basically another way of saying that if you load premium you'll pen it, and that's exactly what we'll see. And you can see here we're up against the T-54 lightweight, who is not going to pose much of a threat against this 440 alpha damage gun that the ST1 does get when you're fully upgraded. Of course, when you're not fully upgraded you don't quite get that armor, but it's still very competitive. And this game, we managed to pick up quite a lot of damage, and you can see here the first bounce there from the Badger hitting into the turret, which is nice. And even if it hits the hull armor, because we're angled upwards, we can get some easy shells coming in and bouncing off of us. So it's quite nice if you can get on a ridge line to the point where like you're not exposing the actual frontal hull armor and that lower plate. So it's always nice when you can get into that sort of position. You can see me here just trying to get some easy shots into the VK7501K, which is of course the rear mounted German tier 8 heavy tank, which is pretty good in all senses. I actually really enjoyed playing that tank. That gets 490 alpha and quite a consistent little heavy tank, especially when you do keep that frontal armor towards your opponents. It's yet again a bit of a premium, rounds will ruin it, but it's still a very consistent tank. At tier 8 games you're also very competitive, but the STI or the ST1, whatever you want to call it, you guys can make up your own minds as to what you want to call it, but it can basically output a lot of rounds pretty quickly. You've got an 8.4 second reload, which is super nice considering the alpha, and also how consistent the tank is in itself. And I found that this is a fairly accurate heavy tank, and that allows you to maintain that damage up against your opponents. You don't really have that problem of feeling like you're left high and dry in those games when you're coming up against some of the medium tanks, like you would with say something like an E100. You know, you have a long reload with that tank, whereas this one not so much, and that allows you to really compete with those mediums, like I say. And especially when you are using enhanced combat rations to boost up and you've got them active, it just reduces the reload even further to the point where you've got about a 7.5 second reload. So that's really, really nice. And that allows you to basically outtrade a lot of the heavies that you'll meet at the tier. And you also have that armor like you've seen. And that's allowed us to pick up 3,500 damage and also 1,460 blocked as well. So, you know, it's coping quite well with this game, and you can see we're holding down a badger, which you know isn't necessarily the hardest thing in the game, but it's allowed us to, you know, plow through this flank. You know, there was only me and this FE215B really over this side. There weren't a whole lot of tanks over on this side to help out, so I'm glad that we've managed to kind of compete. But now it's time to push, because, you know, the enemy team are pushing towards the base. I don't want to get caught out being on one side of the map, so we need to finish off this flank and then turn around and deal with those who may be going towards the cap circle, which you should always do on this map. Staying still and staying in a position that has worked at the beginning of the game can sometimes lead to you just end up doing nothing in the late game. So making sure that you're proactive in pushing with the ST1, since it's not the fastest tank. You can see here, even with it fully upgraded, it's fairly slow at getting up to the top speed when you're on a hill or any area like that, so you do need to move forward. And you can see I'm taking the front foot on this flank because the FE215B is on a low amount of hit points, so we want to make sure that we're the ones taking the hits at this point, because I need him to be able to deal some damage on this flank or help me out in the late game when we're trying to push the rest of the team. So we're down by one tank. It's not looking all too good in our kind of cap circle either, and you can see I tried to go for the shot into the VK as Cupola, but of course we kind of rushed it. I should have just literally, since we took this hit anyway, I could have probably just pushed him anyway and got the damage, but unfortunately not the case, and we do take a hit in return. Now the Badger is of course trying to get a shot on us, but we do find his lower kind of flat frontal plate essentially, and we shut him down there alongside the VK. So a nice little 4,400 damage so far, and we've also blocked 1,900. So we've blocked nearly, well, over the amount of hit points that we've actually got left on this tank, which is good, and that's exactly what you want when you're playing these heavy tanks. And you can see it's mainly because we got hold down, and if you can find positions where you can do that on maps like you saw earlier, we can get the gun depression, because this tank actually has a decent amount of gun depression as well, so you're not really inflexible like you'd see with, I don't know, something like a Chinese heavy tank for example. This one feels a little bit more versatile, so you don't feel too kind of stuck in the mud, and that's really why I recommend this tank to new players. If you're a new player and you're wondering, what tank do I actually pick up in the game as a new player, or a tank that's consistent, or a tank that is going to be able to get you to learn the game a little bit more, I think this one is actually a pretty good one. And although you may see me make some mistakes in a little minute, but we're trying to make our way back to the cap circle. The enemy team are getting in the cap because, you know, always fun when they do that, but we're trying to push and get there before they cap the base. Our tank destroyer on our friendly team, not the 215B183, is actually pushing, and whether or not he'll be able to reset is unknown. And he does manage to do it with literally probably like 0.1 of a second left, and at this point it's the Kanonen Jagdpanzer 105. So what I try and do is try and take the hits from this guy. I'm trying to get in the way, trying to make it difficult for the K91 to hopefully do it. I'm using the kind of auto, or not auto aim, but using the free aim to try and do it, and this is where I make the mistake. I try and go forward towards him. I realise the SU-101 is going to be the painful tank for me at this point, so I do make the play or decision to actually turn around. And unfortunately, because of the hull traverse and turret traverse that the ST1 actually has, yeah, we managed to not be able to turn quite as quickly as I would have liked, and unfortunately that is the case with these slower heavy tanks. And although we are able to hit that K91 in all essence, I do kind of mess it up, and here you go, the typical when you're trying to turn your tank and then your turret ends up going the opposite direction to where you're actually trying to drag it, and we end up throwing the game at the end, even though we should have definitely taken out that K91 because we ended up bouncing a shell. But we were using this tank during the XP with interest operation, which is why we picked up 30,000 XP, having done 5,800 damage. So the previous game showcased a game where you're focusing on trying to get the damage and of course trying to win the game, but you know, when you're throwing it at the end of the game against a lower tier vehicle than you, it's always fun, but we still pick up 5,800 damage. This one, a little bit of something different where we're focusing on trying to get assistance damage because we are a bottom tier tank in a town map where you are having to really get some team support from your allies in the mediums and the heavy tanks that are going to come with you. Now, going into the town on Lakeville is often where you should go with your heavy tank if you are in a traditional heavy tank. If you are in something like a Cranvarn, taking the hill area on the left is often a better position for you since you have the turret to use it there. But at this point, I'm going to push into the town, and that means that we are going to require at least a little bit of team support. So you're seeing me here stop for a second. I'm going to go for a blind fire into the typical camping position for the TDs, and that allows us to maybe pick up a shell of damage. We didn't just then, but it's something you can use in your own game. Obviously if you're spotted, stop in there. I would never recommend it, just keep going. But if you are undetected and you're not likely to get spotted if you fire, then take the shot because you never know, you might end up with a bit of damage. So just pre-aim that kind of area in C4. That's always a good place to get a free shot of damage on campers. So at this point I'm pushing in. We want to get up close and personal with some of the enemy heavy tanks, so I'm not going to overcommit. Sometimes you can push right up to this area over here, and it can be really painful. So I'm very cautious as to just going straight out, so I'm going to take a little bit of a side scrape, see what tanks are indeed over here, and it is indeed a Conqueror. And there's also a couple of other heavy tanks over here too, so not particularly the greatest scenario. We've got a little bit of team support, so I decide to track the Conqueror, keep him in place, and then take a little bit of a slow reverse, just trying to angle for people and then locking down people its tracks at the same time. I'm hoping that 257 would have actually come around the corner and tried to help me out here, or at least get some shots as they're trying to farm me up, but apparently not the case. And so, yeah, we end up taking quite a bit of damage. So not particularly the greatest idea to push up that early in the game. Often I would just come up to this corner here and then side scrape and see what the enemy tanks are going to be doing. Because if you overcommit, you can lose a ton of hit points like you saw there. Sometimes it can work. Most of the time, if you want to be consistent throughout your games, I wouldn't recommend pushing that far. But either way, we did it. That's what's happened. We've got to play as we can at this point. So we've picked up, what, 1,500 assistance damage, and that's purely by just going for the tracks on those opponents that we've seen. And this is something that you should be doing in all of your games. If you can go for damage and assistance, I always recommend that you do. And we go for the enemy object 257 or 705 even. Managed to hit him quite easily, and we're just trying to get as much damage as possible. We don't want to over peak. I'm only on 483 hit points, and at this point, you know, we're at one shot to the 703 or 705 even. God, I'm getting this completely wrong. But the 780 there, not probably, I mean, it could manage to take us out in one shot if he rolled average, but yeah, it's not a guaranteed, so we could get lucky. But instead I go for the tracking shot on him, knowing full well that our team are going to basically pump him, and that gives us a little bit of extra damage, even in a game where maybe things didn't go your way with your hit points. And as you get through the later stages of the game, you're going to need those hit points, so just being a little bit more passive and going for that supporting role is exactly what you want to do. And so I'll do a little bit of an aim there. Wasn't sure if the waffle will move past, but we get a free shot of damage into him, which is always good. And then we're just going to make our push towards this Gorilla 15 and whatever's going to be camping at the back. And we actually, in fact, managed to spot the object 752, which is good because the view range of the ST1, considering it's a heavy tank, is actually not awful, and especially if you're using coated optics or something like that, it's always good. Now we went for the tracking shot on the 752 since there was no other shot that we could get, and guess what? We got some extra assistance damage in this game and pick up 4,262 assistance, and that really saved my game there. There weren't that many opportunities to get multiple shots, but getting those tracking assists allows us to have a much better game, and that's why I wanted to show that sometimes when you are playing in these heavy tanks, you do have to play a support role, especially if you're in a bottom tier heavy tank and you don't manage to get the perfect play at the beginning, as you saw there, managing to get what, like 75% of my hit points taken away within the first 2 minutes of the game starting. So playing that passive role and coming out with a good result either way. And hopefully you did enjoy this little review of both the actual damage potential that the ST1 can do, as well as that assistance. And if you want to watch another video, we have tons in the gameplay and tank reviews playlist, which will be on screen right now. And I hope you join me there, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of the week, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.